I found the first camera inside my living room lamp at 10:43 on a Tuesday night. And the worst part wasn't the tiny black lens staring back at me. It was realizing my son had probably watched me cry in that chair, holding my dead husband's sweater like a fool. Hello, everyone. I'm Grace. When family starts calling control care, look closer. Someone is always gaining something. Subscribe and tell me what you'd do if your own child crossed this line. My name is Miriam Croft. I am 66 years old, and I live alone in Ravens Hollow, Connecticut, in the same house my husband Arthur and I bought in 1982. It sits at the end of Briar Lane, where the road bends toward the river, and the maple trees scrape the delivery trucks in October. Arthur used to say the house had bad knees, just like him. The porch leaned, the upstairs bathroom groaned in winter, and the kitchen cabinets never closed properly unless you hit them with your hip. But it was ours. We raised our son Nolan there. We buried 2 dogs under the lilac bushes. We drank coffee on that porch every Sunday morning until Arthur's heart gave out 7 years ago, beside a bag of mulch and a cherry turnover from Bellamy's bakery. After he died, Nolan started visiting more. At first, I thought it was grief. He would bring groceries I hadn't asked for, open my refrigerator, look through my mail, glance at my pill organizer. You eating enough, Mom? You taking your medicine? You sure you should still be driving? He never shouted. That would have been easier. He just sighed softly, like I was a problem he loved but no longer knew how to solve. Then he married Tessa Greer. Tessa had a gentle voice and cold eyes. She wore cream blouses, smelled like bergamot lotion, and spoke to me as if every sentence had been approved by a lawyer. "We're only worried about you, Miriam," she would say. Worried became her favorite word. She was worried when I forgot the name of a neighbor's nephew. Worried when I bought a heavy cast-iron crepe pan at a flea market. Worried when I didn't answer during my afternoon nap. Worried when I refused to tour Willowmere Residence, a luxury senior lifestyle community with pottery classes, a saltwater pool, and smiling old people in the brochure who looked like paid actors. I already have a lifestyle, I told her. It's called living in my own house. Nolan looked embarrassed. Tessa only folded her hands. The house was the real issue. I knew that even before the cameras. Developers had been circling Briar Lane for 2 years because of the river access. A man named Farley Brenner had already bought 3 houses down the road and replaced one of them with a sign showing shiny townhomes called the Estuary Collection. He sent me fruit baskets, letters, even a ridiculous jar of Sicilian pistachio cream. I sent back everything except the cream. I may be stubborn, but I'm not wasteful. Nolan said I should consider selling. It's a lot of money, Mom. So was your father's life insurance, I said. You spent your share quickly enough. After that, he grew quiet. Tessa did not. She simply began using softer words for harder things. 3 weeks before I found the camera, Nolan asked for my spare key. "What if you fall?" he said, standing in my hallway with rain on his coat. "What if something happens and we can't get in?" "I've unlocked my own door for 66 years. Mom. Just one word. Tired. Disappointed. Heavy. And because some part of me still saw the little boy who used to ask for cinnamon toast after nightmares, I gave him the key. That was my mistake. The lamp where I found the camera had belonged to Arthur's mother. Capodimonte porcelain, with tiny painted roses and dusty gold fringe. Ugly, delicate, sentimental. Arthur used to joke it looked stolen from a duchess with bad taste. I kept it beside my reading chair because, after he died, I couldn't move anything from that corner. That Tuesday night, rain tapped the windows. I was knitting a green scarf I didn't need and drinking Earl Grey from Arthur's old blue mug. I dropped a stitch marker, bent down, and noticed the lamp cord was twisted the wrong way. People who live alone know their things. A chair angled differently. A book moved. A curtain pulled too far. My lamp had been touched. I reached behind it, and something inside the porcelain base blinked. A tiny green light. I leaned closer. Between two painted roses was a black dot no bigger than a peppercorn. A lens. I did not scream. I did not call Nolan. I sat back slowly and looked around my own living room. The mantel, the clock, the smoke detector, the basket of yarn, Arthur's photograph. Suddenly, everything looked guilty. The night before, I had cried in that chair after another Willowmere brochure arrived. I had pressed Arthur's old cardigan to my face because it still smelled faintly of cedar, or maybe I only wanted it to. And someone might have watched. My son might have watched. I took Arthur's magnifying glass from the desk, photographed the lens, the green light, and the lamp from 3 angles. Then I put everything exactly as it had been. Before bed, I turned toward the lamp and smiled. "Good night," I said softly. Then I switched it off and let them wonder what I knew. I barely slept that night. Not because I was frightened, surprisingly enough, but because once you realize somebody has been watching you inside your own home, every familiar sound changes shape. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen stopped sounding ordinary. The ticking hallway clock became irritatingly loud. Even the old pipes behind the bathroom wall made me tense, like someone whispering behind a door. At 6:12 the next morning, I made coffee and sat in the same chair beneath the lamp. I wanted them to think nothing had changed. That was the first decision I made purely for myself. Outside, rainwater still clung to the maple branches along Briar Lane. The river behind the houses looked dark and swollen from the storm, carrying little patches of leaves and broken twigs downstream. Arthur used to call mornings like that steel water mornings. Cold enough to sharpen a person. I wore my pale green robe, the one with the frayed cuff, and opened the local paper directly in front of the lamp, as if I were giving whoever watched me a proper show. My hands stayed steady. Inside, though, something hard had begun forming behind my ribs. At exactly 8:03, Nolan called. "Morning, Mom." His voice sounded casual. Too casual. "Morning. You sleep okay?" There it was. Small, harmless. Except now every question sounded loaded. "Fine," I answered. "Why?" "No reason, just checking in." Checking in. I stared straight at the lamp while I spoke. "That's kind of you." There was a pause long enough for me to picture him glancing toward Tessa. Then he cleared his throat. "Tessa and I were thinking of stopping by tomorrow night, maybe bring dinner." I almost laughed. Tessa never brought dinner unless there was a purpose attached to it. Last Thanksgiving, she arrived carrying truffle mushroom ravioli and a folder from Willowmere residence in the same tote bag. "That's sweet," I said, "but tomorrow won't work. I'm busy." Another pause. Busy doing what? That irritated me more than the camera. "At my age," I said mildly, "staying alive takes up most of the afternoon." He forced a chuckle. "Mom, I let silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "Well," he finally said, "let us know if you need anything." Need anything. When we hung up, I sat there staring at Arthur's photograph on the mantel. The frame was scratched near the corner because he had once dropped it while trying to hang Christmas lights after 2 glasses of bourbon and an argument about extension cords. "You'd hate this," I muttered. Arthur believed in privacy with near religious intensity. He once refused to buy a smart television because he claimed anything that listens when unplugged deserves an exorcism. I suddenly wished he were sitting in the kitchen, muttering about government surveillance while buttering toast. Instead, I was alone with a hidden camera in my lamp. At noon, Tessa texted me. "How are you feeling today, Miriam? Didn't sound like yourself yesterday." I read the message 3 times. "Not yourself." That was the language they had started using over the last year. Tiny phrases, careful phrases, phrases that could later be repeated in a doctor's office or legal meeting. Confused lately, forgetful, emotional, not herself. I typed back, "Feeling wonderful," made lamb stew, burned my tongue because I was impatient. Then I added a smiling emoji because Tessa hated emojis, said they looked chaotic. 5 minutes later, she replied with a heart. I stared at it until my coffee went cold. Around 3 that afternoon, I began checking the house properly. Not dramatically, slowly. I started with the smoke detector in the hallway because I had noticed it the night before. I dragged over the old wooden step stool Arthur built decades ago and climbed carefully, knees cracking the whole way. The detector looked ordinary from below. From above, it looked expensive. Tiny ventilation slits, fresh screws, a faint blue light hidden under the plastic rim. I unscrewed it. There it was. Another lens. For a moment, anger hit me so suddenly I had to grip the wall. Not theatrical anger, not shouting. Worse. The cold kind. They had watched me walk to the bathroom at night. Watched me pacing after nightmares. Watched me talk to Arthur's picture when grief got heavy enough to press against my lungs. I took photographs again. Careful ones. Then I screwed the detector back exactly as before. By evening, I had found 3 more. One inside the living room clock, one behind the bookshelf facing the dining room, and one hidden inside a ridiculous ceramic owl near the kitchen window that Tessa herself had given me last Christmas. "Handmade," she'd said proudly. It was handmade, apparently, for spying on me while I reheated soup. I lined up the photographs on my phone and forced myself to breathe slowly. 5 cameras. 5. That wasn't worry. That was surveillance. At 7:40, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I nearly jumped. For one terrible second, I thought it was Nolan and Tessa showing up unannounced. But when I opened the door, it was my neighbor Otis Vale holding a dented aluminum tray covered in foil. Otis was 73, broad-shouldered, permanently sunburned, and smelled faintly of sawdust no matter the season. He had spent 40 years installing security systems before retiring, and he distrusted technology almost as much as Arthur did. "Made too much brisket," he grunted. "Again." "You always make too much brisket." "That's because cooking for one feels pathetic." I stepped aside to let him in. The moment Otis entered the living room, his eyes moved automatically toward the lamp. Then the smoke detector. Then the bookshelf. I saw his expression change, small, fast, but enough. "You all right, Miriam?" he asked quietly. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "No," I said, "I don't think I am." And for the first time since finding the camera, I decided I wasn't going to handle this alone. Otis did not say a word for almost a full minute after I told him about the cameras. He simply stood in my living room holding his foil-covered brisket tray while his eyes moved slowly from the lamp to the bookshelf and then toward the hallway smoke detector. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. "That's not amateur work," he muttered. I folded my arms tightly against myself. "You can tell that just by looking?" People hiding nanny cams from babysitters buy cheap garbage online. This? He pointed toward the lamp without touching it. That setup costs money. Something about hearing it from him made my stomach tighten harder. Otis set the brisket down in the kitchen and asked for a screwdriver. I brought him Arthur's old toolbox, the heavy red one with faded Gulf oil stickers peeling off the side. Arthur used to say a man's toolbox told you everything about him. His had always smelled faintly of motor oil, cedar shavings, and wintergreen gum. Otis climbed onto the step stool beneath the smoke detector and carefully loosened it. He studied the inside for maybe 10 seconds before giving a low whistle. "Cloud connected," he said. "I don't know what that means." "It means somebody can watch remotely from a phone or tablet. Live feed." My throat went dry again. Otis glanced at me carefully. "You know who installed these?" "Yes." He nodded once, grimly, like he already knew the answer. "Nolan? And Tessa?" For a second, genuine anger flashed across his face. Otis had known Nolan since Nolan was 8 years old and nearly broke his arm trying to jump a bicycle ramp made of stolen plywood. "That boy used to cry when he stepped on ants," he muttered. "Well," I said quietly, "apparently he grew out of it." Otis checked the second camera hidden inside the clock near the mantel. Same system. Same tiny transmitter. Same blinking indicator buried deep enough most people would never notice it. "Jesus Christ," he said under his breath. "How many you got?" "5 so far." His head snapped toward me. "5?" I nodded. The room suddenly felt smaller after saying it aloud. Otis stepped down from the stool and rubbed the back of his neck. "Miriam, this isn't concern anymore. This is documentation." That word hit me strangely. Documentation. Not care. Not protection. Evidence. I thought about Tessa's careful little phrases over the past year. "You forgot where you left your purse again." "You seemed emotional yesterday." "You don't always sound like yourself lately." I walked slowly toward the kitchen sink because I suddenly felt too warm. Outside, the river wind rattled the bare branches against the windows, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and stopped. "They're trying to prove something," I whispered. Otis didn't answer immediately, which told me enough. Then he asked quietly, "You got a lawyer?" The question startled me. I'm not suing my own son. "Aren't you?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. Because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. Otis lowered his voice. "Miriam, listen carefully to me. Don't remove another camera yet. Don't confront them. Don't even hint you know." "Why?" "Because people get sloppy when they think they're winning." That sounded exactly like something Arthur would have said. Otis carefully reattached the smoke detector, making sure every screw sat exactly where it had before. Then he wiped his fingerprints from the plastic rim with the edge of his sleeve. "You trust me?" he asked. "Yes." Good. Tomorrow morning, I want you to drive to Hartford Security Supply on Mason Street. Ask for a man named Eddie Varela. Don't explain everything there. Just tell him Otis Vale sent you and you need a private sweep done quietly. A sweep? To see if 5 cameras are all they planted. My chest tightened. Because until that moment, I had not considered there might be more. Otis picked up his brisket tray again and headed toward the front door. Before leaving, he paused beneath the hallway light. Miriam, he said carefully, whatever they're doing, this didn't start recently. After he left, I locked the door, checked the windows twice, and stood alone in the quiet house listening to the old pipes hum behind the walls. Then my phone buzzed, a text from Nolan. Hey, Mom. You seem stressed lately. Maybe we should talk about getting you a little extra support around the house. I stared at the message for a very long time. Then I looked directly toward the hidden camera inside the owl by the kitchen window and smiled. For the first time in years, the fear inside me was beginning to turn into something else. Something colder? The next morning, I drove to Hartford Security Supply with a travel mug of burnt coffee in one hand and Arthur's old leather gloves on the passenger seat beside me. I hadn't worn those gloves in years. They were cracked at the fingertips and still smelled faintly of cedar and tobacco. Somehow, having them nearby steadied me. Hartford Security Supply sat between a plumbing warehouse and a bait shop near Mason Street. The sign outside flickered slightly, one of the letters half dead. Inside, the place smelled like dust, machine oil, and stale cinnamon gum. A man with silver-framed glasses stood behind the counter soldering wires under a hanging lamp. "Can I help you?" he asked without looking up. Otis Vale sent me. That got his attention immediately. He lowered the soldering tool and studied me carefully. "You Miriam Croft?" I blinked. Otis called ahead? He said if a woman looking ready to bury somebody walked through my door this morning, it'd probably be you. Despite everything, I almost smiled. His name was Eddie Varela, mid-60s. Sharp eyes, calm voice, the kind of man who noticed details without making a performance out of it. I liked him immediately. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. Hidden cameras, my house, family involved. The moment I said family, his expression changed slightly. "That's usually how this kind of thing starts," he muttered. He closed the front blinds before speaking again. "You got proof the system belongs to them?" "Not yet." "Then don't touch anything." That was the second person telling me the same thing. Eddie explained that modern residential systems stored access logs remotely. If Nolan or Tessa had connected the cameras through an app, there would be records, login times, linked devices, account ownership, cloud backups. "People think deleting footage erases everything," he said. "Usually, it just hides it from amateurs." I folded my hands tightly in my lap. "Can you help me?" He leaned back in his chair for a moment before answering. "Officially? No. Unofficially?" He shrugged. "Otis once fixed my truck transmission for free in a snowstorm. So yes." By noon, Eddie was parked discreetly outside my house in a faded gray van with the words Valley Electric painted on the side. If Nolan or Tessa happened to drive by, it would look like maintenance work. Inside, Eddie moved room by room with slow precision. No wasted movement. No dramatic reactions. He found 2 more cameras within 15 minutes. One inside the kitchen smoke detector. Another hidden beneath the hallway table facing the staircase. 7 total. I sat down heavily on the sofa when he said the number aloud. 7 cameras, 7 angles inside my own home. Eddie crouched near the bookshelf, adjusting a small handheld scanner. These weren't installed all at once. What do you mean? Different battery dates, different firmware versions. He glanced toward me. Some are older. How old? Hard to say exactly, but this one? He tapped the hallway unit. At least 8 or 9 months? I felt something cold spread through my chest. 9 months. That meant they had been watching me long before the conversations about Willowmere became frequent. Before the concern. Before Nolan started checking expiration dates in my refrigerator like a parole officer. This had been planned. Eddie disconnected nothing. Instead, he photographed serial numbers, transmission frequencies, hidden ports. Then he handed me a small notepad. Write down every interaction you remember with your son and daughter-in-law over the last year, especially conversations about your memory, your health, your house, your finances. That sounds paranoid. No, Eddie said quietly. Paranoid is when there's nobody watching. That stayed with me. Around 4 in the afternoon, after Eddie left, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the notepad open in front of me. At first, the memories came slowly. Tessa asking whether I'd considered assigning medical power of attorney. Nolan insisting I stop driving after I got lost once near Milford. Tessa commenting that I repeated stories. Nolan photographing my medication bottles for emergencies. Then more started surfacing. Tiny things. Strange things. The time I found the stove turned on after grocery shopping and assumed I had forgotten it myself. The missing electric bill that mysteriously appeared 3 days later beneath a couch cushion. The vase Arthur bought in Montreal somehow shattered on the floor after Tessa visited, followed by her soft voice saying, "Miriam, maybe it's time to admit some things are getting difficult." I stopped writing. My pulse had become uneven, because for the first time, another possibility entered my mind. What if some of those things hadn't been accidents? At 6:17, my phone rang. Tessa. I let it ring twice before answering. Miriam? Her voice sounded warm, careful. Just checking on you. Nolan said you seemed tense yesterday. I stared directly at the ceramic owl near the kitchen window while she spoke. I'm perfectly fine. Oh, good. A pause. What did you do today? There it was again. Not conversation. Fishing. I smiled slowly. Oh, nothing exciting, I said. Just spent the afternoon thinking about who's been moving things around in my house. Silence. Tiny, brief. But enough. Then Tessa laughed softly. You always say the funniest things. And suddenly I knew with absolute certainty. She was scared. By Friday morning, I had stopped feeling shocked. Angry, yes. Humiliated, absolutely. But shock fades faster than people think. The human mind has a strange talent for adjusting to betrayal once it realizes betrayal is real. What remained was clarity. I started noticing patterns everywhere. At 9 o'clock, Nolan called, asking whether I had remembered to pay my water bill. The problem was, I had paid it 3 days earlier and hadn't mentioned it to anyone. At 11:20, Tessa texted me a reminder to be careful on the stairs, even though I had slipped slightly that morning while carrying laundry. Nobody should have known about that. By noon, my stomach felt like it had swallowed ice. They weren't guessing about my life. They were monitoring it, I spent most of the afternoon sitting at the kitchen table with Eddie's notepad and Arthur's old fountain pen, writing down every strange incident from the past year. The list became longer than I expected. The stove left on. Medication moved. Missing mail. Tessa repeatedly mentioning memory clinics. Nolan suggesting I sign temporary financial authorization just in case. One memory kept bothering me more than the others. 3 months earlier, I had lost my purse for nearly an entire day. I eventually found it inside the laundry room cabinet, beside the detergent pods. I remembered standing there, confused and embarrassed, while Tessa watched me with that careful expression she used whenever she wanted to appear compassionate. "These things happen, Miriam," she had said softly. "Sometimes people need support before they realize they need it." At the time, I believed her. Now I wasn't so sure. Around 4 o'clock, somebody knocked at my front door. Not the doorbell. Knuckles. 3 quick taps. I opened it to find my granddaughter Junie standing on the porch with a cardboard tray holding 2 iced coffees and a paper bag from Marrow and Pine Bakery. Junie was 24, sharp-eyed, restless, and permanently overdressed for Ravens Hollow. Even in cold weather, she somehow looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine nobody over 50 could afford. "Mom sent me to check on you," she admitted immediately as she walked inside. "But I also brought almond croissants, so technically I come in peace." I almost smiled. Junie had inherited Nolan's eyes before life hardened them. We sat in the kitchen together while rain drifted lightly against the windows. "You okay?" she asked carefully. "I'm breathing. That's usually a promising sign." She snorted into her coffee. For a while, we talked about harmless things. Her new apartment, a disaster date involving a man who owned 3 swords, the bakery replacing their blackberry scones with cardamom pear. Then her expression shifted. Subtle. Nervous. "Grandma?" She looked down at her cup. "Can I ask something weird?" "You may ask several weird things." She hesitated. "Are you actually forgetting stuff lately?" There it was. I set my coffee down very carefully. "Why would you ask me that?" Junie immediately looked uncomfortable. "No reason." "Juniper." She sighed heavily and rubbed her forehead. "A few weeks ago, I was at Mom and Dad's place," she admitted quietly. Mom had the living room camera feed open on her iPad. Every muscle in my body went still. Junie kept talking quickly now, as if saying it faster would make it less ugly. "She said she needed to monitor you because you were becoming unpredictable. Dad kept replaying clips of you talking to yourself or misplacing things." She swallowed hard. "Mom said it would help if they ever needed to prove you couldn't live alone safely anymore." The kitchen suddenly felt airless. That moment right there, that's the kind of betrayal that changes something permanently inside a person. "Tell me honestly, what would you have done sitting in Miriam's chair?" Junie looked horrified after saying it aloud. "I didn't think they'd actually installed cameras without telling you," she whispered. "I thought you knew." I stared out the dark kitchen window toward the river beyond the trees. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't." And for the first time since finding the cameras, I finally understood something terrifying. They weren't just watching me. They were building a case against me. That night I did something I had not done in years. I locked my bedroom door. Not because I thought Nolan would suddenly appear in the middle of the night like some television criminal, but because once trust cracks, the mind begins protecting itself in strange little ways. The click of the lock sounded louder than usual in the quiet house. I barely slept. Every creak made me think about cameras. Every passing pair of headlights made me wonder whether someone was parked outside, watching the windows. By morning, exhaustion had settled deep behind my eyes like wet sand. At 8:15, I drove to downtown Hartford to meet the lawyer Otis had recommended years ago after a property dispute with one of his cousins. Celia Rook's office occupied the second floor of an old brick building above a watch repair shop. The hallway smelled faintly of dust, paper, and strong coffee. Inside, the office was unexpectedly elegant. Dark wood shelves, brass lamps, heavy green curtains, and a small porcelain fox sitting beside a stack of legal folders. Celia herself looked exactly like the kind of woman nobody should underestimate. Mid-60s, silver hair pinned neatly at the back of her head, amber glasses, dark charcoal suit, calm eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything. The cameras, the comments about my memory, the hidden surveillance, Junie seeing the video feeds. The longer I spoke, the colder Celia's expression became. Finally, she folded her hands together. "Mrs. Croft," she said carefully, "your son and daughter-in-law may have crossed several legal lines here." The word legal made my stomach twist. "I'm not trying to send my son to prison." "That's not what I said." Her voice stayed calm. "But what they're doing carries consequences." I handed her the printed photographs Eddie helped me make that morning. Camera placements, serial numbers, timestamps. Celia studied them silently. Then she asked, "Have they encouraged you to give up financial control or leave your home?" "Yes." "How often?" "Enough that it stopped sounding casual." She nodded once. "And these incidents where items moved or appeared misplaced, did that begin before or after the cameras?" I stared at her. "Before," I admitted slowly. Celia leaned back in her chair. "That concerns me." The room suddenly felt colder. "You think they were staging things?" I whispered. "I think," she replied carefully, "that people motivated by property and control often escalate gradually." Property. There it was again. Not concern for me, not family. The house. Celia opened a legal pad and began writing notes in quick, precise lines. "Here's what you're going to do," she said. "First, you do not confront them, not yet." Everybody keeps saying that. Because emotionally reckless people reveal more when they feel safe. She removed her glasses briefly. "Second, you will document absolutely everything: calls, texts, visits, every comment about your competency, memory, health, finances." I nodded slowly. "Third," she looked directly at me now, "you need to prepare for the possibility that they intended to pursue guardianship." The word hit me like cold water. Guardianship. I had heard stories. Older people declared incapable, homes sold, accounts controlled, entire lives reduced to supervised schedules and polite prison walls. "No," I whispered automatically. "Nolan wouldn't." But even as I said it, I remembered the cameras. 7 of them. Celia watched my face carefully. "Mrs. Croft," she said softly, "good people do terrible things once they start believing they're entitled to someone else's life." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then my phone buzzed on the desk. Nolan. Celia glanced at the screen. "Answer it," she said. I hesitated. Then I picked up. "Hey, Mom," Nolan said warmly. Too warmly. "Just checking in." I stared at the legal folders stacked beside Celia's desk. "I'm fine." "You sure?" Tessa said you sounded upset yesterday. There was that word again. Upset. Fragile. Unstable. I suddenly realized they had been building this narrative piece by piece for months. Nolan lowered his voice slightly. Mom, we're just worried you're isolating yourself lately. Across from me, Celia slowly wrote something on her notepad while listening. I swallowed carefully. You know, I said quietly, people become very interesting when they think nobody's paying attention to them. Silence. Very brief. But enough. Then Nolan laughed nervously. I'm not sure what that means. Oh, I replied softly. I think you do. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I heard uncertainty enter my son's voice. After the call with Nolan, Celia remained quiet for a few seconds, tapping her pen lightly against the desk. He's nervous now, she said at last. You can hear that already? I've spent 30 years listening to people lie professionally. Despite everything, that almost made me smile. Before I left, Celia gave me a small digital recorder, no bigger than a lipstick case. Keep it with you, she said. And Miriam, start assuming every interaction with them has a purpose. The drive home felt different, not safer, just clearer. By the time I pulled into Briar Lane, dusk had settled over the neighborhood, turning the river behind the houses into a strip of black glass. My porch light flickered weakly as I climbed the steps. Grocery bag hanging from one wrist. The moment I opened the front door, I stopped. Something smelled wrong. Gas. Faint, but unmistakable. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I moved quickly toward the kitchen and found the front burner slightly turned on. No flame. Just gas leaking quietly into the room. For one horrible second, I questioned myself. Did I leave it on? At my age, self-doubt arrives faster than certainty. That was exactly what made this kind of manipulation so dangerous. Then I remembered something. I hadn't cooked since morning. I had eaten leftover roast chicken cold from the refrigerator before leaving for Hartford. I hadn't touched the stove all day. My hands turned icy. I immediately shut the burner off and opened every window in the kitchen. Then I froze again. Because sitting beside the fruit bowl near the window was my blue pill organizer. I never kept it there. Never. I walked toward it slowly, pulse hammering harder now. Thursday's compartment stood open. 2 pills missing. I stared at it in silence. Someone had been inside my house. Not a stranger, someone with a key. I grabbed the digital recorder from my purse just as headlights swept briefly across the front curtains outside, a car slowing near the house, then moving again. I stepped carefully toward the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. Black SUV, Nolan's. The vehicle rolled slowly past the house before disappearing around the bend toward the river. My chest tightened so painfully, I had to grip the curtain. Not worry, not concern, monitoring, testing. I suddenly remembered another moment from months earlier when Tessa stood in this exact kitchen, watching me search for my missing purse. These little memory slips can become serious, Miriam, she'd said softly. At the time, I believed she was helping me. Now I could practically see her placing the purse in the laundry cabinet herself. My phone buzzed. A text from Tessa. Did you remember your medication tonight? Just checking. I stared at the message until my vision blurred slightly. Then, very slowly, I looked toward the hidden camera inside the ceramic owl near the kitchen window. And for the first time, I stopped feeling like prey. Because predators get careless when they think the animal is already trapped. The next morning, I changed the locks. Not dramatically, not with police cars or accusations or Nolan pounding on the porch demanding answers. I simply called a locksmith from Milford named Greg Holland, a man with nicotine yellow fingers and a tattoo of a trout on his forearm, and told him I wanted every lock on the property replaced before lunch. "Family trouble?" he asked while changing the deadbolt. "Yes." He nodded like a man who had heard every version of that sentence. By noon, Nolan's key no longer opened my front door. I cannot fully describe how strange that felt. For years, motherhood had trained me to leave access open, to make room, to forgive first and think later. But standing there with a brand new brass key in my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Protected. At 1:30, Celia called. "I need you to check your banking records carefully," she said, "especially inquiries, authorization attempts, anything unusual." I drove straight to Fairwick Community Bank downtown. The young woman at the desk recognized me immediately because Arthur and I had banked there since Ronald Reagan was president. "Mrs. Croft, good to see you." I almost laughed at that phrase. Good to see you. Such an ordinary kindness suddenly felt rare. After 20 minutes with the branch manager, my stomach began turning colder by the second. 2 months earlier, Nolan had requested information about future assisted account access procedures. Last month, somebody had asked whether my accounts already had a secondary emergency user attached. The request had been denied, but the questions had been asked. I sat perfectly still while the manager explained this, hands folded tightly in my lap. "Who made the inquiries?" I asked quietly. He hesitated just long enough to answer the question without words. "Nolan Croft visited in person," he admitted carefully. I thanked him, walked out of the bank, and sat in my car staring through the windshield for almost 5 full minutes. They were preparing, not emotionally, legally. That realization hollowed something out inside me. On the drive home, I stopped at Bellamy's Bakery and bought a walnut fig tart I didn't even want, simply because I suddenly couldn't bear the thought of returning to that house empty-handed. When I got home, there was a white SUV parked across the street. Tessa's. She was sitting inside, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. The engine was running. Watching. The moment she noticed my car, she smiled and stepped out as though this were a casual coincidence. "Miriam," she called warmly. "I was worried about you." I carried the bakery box slowly up the walkway. Most people express worry from a greater distance. Her smile twitched slightly. "I stopped by yesterday," she said. "Your key didn't work." "Yes," I replied calmly. "That was intentional." For the first time since this began, I saw genuine tension break through her polished expression. "Miriam," she lowered her voice carefully, "you're making this harder than it needs to be." Harder, interesting word. Not sadder, not painful. Harder. I unlocked my front door but didn't open it yet. Why exactly were there 7 cameras in my house, Tessa? The color drained from her face so fast it almost startled me. For 1 full second, she forgot how to pretend. Then came the recovery. Fast, impressive, chilling. "We installed monitoring devices because Nolan was concerned about your safety." Inside my lamp? Her jaw tightened slightly. "You've been confused lately." There it was again. Confused. The script. I stepped closer, lowering my own voice now. "You know what's fascinating?" I said softly. "The stove somehow turning on when I never touched it. My purse disappearing. Pills moving." I watched her eyes carefully, almost like somebody wanted me to seem forgetful. Tessa went completely still. And in that moment, I knew. Not suspected. Knew. Tessa's smile returned, but weaker now. "I think," she said carefully, "you're spiraling a little." "No," I replied. "I think your problem is that I stopped doubting myself." Then I stepped inside, locked the new deadbolt, and left her standing alone on the porch without another word. I expected Nolan to call after that confrontation with Tessa. He didn't. That frightened me more than yelling would have. Silence from emotional people usually means one of two things: panic or planning. For the next 2 days, neither of them came near the house. No surprise visits, no fake concern, no soft little texts asking whether I'd taken my medication. Nothing. Meanwhile, Celia moved quickly. By Monday afternoon, she had obtained preliminary records connected to the monitoring system Eddie identified. The account linked to the cameras belonged not to Nolan, but to Tessa Greer Croft. Primary administrator access. Remote login history. Cloud storage activity dating back almost 11 months. 11. I sat frozen in Celia's office while she slid the printed records across the desk toward me. "They archived footage," she said quietly. "Archived?" "Saved clips." I suddenly felt nauseous. Not random surveillance. Selected moments. Curated moments. Celia removed her glasses. "Miriam, some of these file labels concern me." She turned the papers slightly. "Confusion _episode_3. Stove _incident. Disoriented _after_NAP. Medication forgetfulness." For a second, I genuinely could not breathe. They had cataloged my life like evidence in a criminal investigation. Worse than that, they had named the clips before the events even happened. That meant intention, planning, manipulation. My hands shook so badly I had to place them flat against my knees. Celia's voice softened slightly. "There's more." She opened a second folder. Inside were printed emails. One sender immediately caught my eye. Farley Brenner, the developer. I stared at the page while cold spread through my chest. The emails were between Farley and Tessa. Most were vague enough to sound harmless at first glance. Discussions about future property availability, market timing, and transition logistics. But one sentence made my stomach twist. Once Miriam relocates, Nolan believes the sale process should move quickly. Relocates. Not if, when. I looked up slowly. They already planned to sell my house. Celia nodded once, and likely intended to establish legal incapacity first. It strengthens control over property decisions. I suddenly remembered every conversation about Willowmere. The brochures, the fake sympathy, the pressure, even the damn pottery classes. None of it had ever been about me. Imagine discovering your own family had been quietly planning your removal from your life while smiling at your dinner table. I'm telling you now. Some betrayals don't heal cleanly. At 6 o'clock that evening, Nolan finally called. I answered on speaker while Celia listened silently across the desk. "Mom," he said carefully, "we need to talk." "No," I replied calmly. "You need to explain." Silence. Then Nolan sighed heavily. Tessa told me you've become paranoid about the cameras. Paranoid. Interesting choice of word when 7 cameras actually existed. I know about the recordings, I said quietly. Another silence. Longer this time. What recordings? I almost admired the audacity. The archived clips, I replied. The labels, the bank inquiries. Farley Brenner. The moment I said Farley's name, something changed completely on the line. Panic. Real panic. Nolan, I said softly. Did you honestly believe I would just disappear quietly? His breathing became uneven. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could have. Not denial, not outrage, admission. I closed my eyes briefly. Because in that moment, the last remaining piece of my son, the little boy I still carried somewhere inside me, finally disappeared. I drove home from Celia's office in complete silence. No radio, no music, just the sound of tires against wet pavement, and the same sentence replaying inside my head over and over. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not, we were trying to help you. Not, you misunderstood. Not even, I'm sorry. My son had spoken like a man upset that his plan had failed. By the time I reached Briar Lane, dusk had already swallowed the river behind the houses. The porch light cast a weak yellow circle across the steps, and for the first time in 40 years, my own home felt unfamiliar to me. I barely had time to set my purse down before headlights swept across the front windows. Nolan. I stayed still. A moment later, somebody knocked hard against the front door. Not polite, not warm, angry. Mom. I walked slowly through the hallway without hurrying. Through the frosted glass beside the door, I could see his silhouette shifting impatiently. When I opened it, Nolan looked terrible. His tie hung loose. His face was pale. Rain darkened the shoulders of his coat. Behind him, Tessa sat rigidly in the passenger seat of the SUV, staring straight ahead. I need to come inside, Nolan said immediately. No. His jaw tightened. Mom, please. You lost the right to please somewhere around camera number 4? That hit him. Good. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. You don't understand what's happening. I almost laughed. No, Nolan, I said quietly. I understand it perfectly now. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped softly against the porch roof overhead. Then his composure cracked. You think this was easy for me? He snapped. Do you have any idea what it's been like dealing with you for the last 2 years? I stared at him. Dealing with me? Like I was mold behind drywall. Your memory problems. My memory problems? I interrupted softly. Or the ones your wife manufactured? His face changed instantly. Tiny movement. Tiny panic. Enough. Inside the SUV, Tessa finally stepped out into the rain. Miriam, she said carefully, this conversation should happen privately. We stopped being private when you installed surveillance equipment in my bedroom hallway. That wasn't... Don't. My voice sharpened for the first time. Do not insult me further by lying badly. Tessa folded her arms tightly against herself. For once, her polished calm looked strained. You were becoming unstable, she said quietly. We had to prepare. Prepare. Such a clean word for something rotten. I stepped fully onto the porch now, cold rain touching the sleeves of my cardigan. "Tell me something honestly," I said. "Did either of you ever plan to ask what I wanted?" Nolan rubbed both hands over his face. "You weren't safe here anymore." "No," I replied. "You just needed me to seem unsafe." Neither of them answered, and that silence told me everything. I suddenly remembered Nolan at age 10, standing in this exact driveway, holding a broken birdhouse he accidentally dropped while helping Arthur. He cried harder over that birdhouse than he seemed to feel, now standing in front of his own mother after spying on her for nearly a year. People don't become monsters all at once. They slide there quietly. One justification at a time. Nolan looked exhausted suddenly. "Mom?" His voice cracked slightly. "You don't understand the financial pressure we're under." There it was. Finally, not concern, money. I looked toward Tessa. She didn't even appear embarrassed anymore, just cornered. "The house," I said quietly. "That's what this was really about." Neither denied it. The river wind moved through the trees behind them, carrying the sharp smell of rain and wet leaves across the porch. Then Tessa made the mistake that destroyed whatever remained of this family. "You were sitting here alone in a 4-bedroom property," she said flatly. "Do you know how irrational that is financially?" Financially, not emotionally, not morally. Financially. Something inside me went completely calm. "This house," I said softly, "is where my husband died. It's where your husband learned to walk. It's where I spent 40 years building a life." I looked directly at Nolan, and somehow you both reduced it to square footage. Nolan looked away first. Not me, him. That mattered more than he realized. I stepped backward toward the doorway. "You need to leave now." "Mom?" "No." My voice stayed perfectly steady. "From this point forward, you speak to me through Celia Rook." Real fear crossed Nolan's face at that. Legal fear. Consequences. Tessa grabbed his arm quietly. "Let's go." For once, she sounded uncertain too. I closed the door before either could answer. Then I locked it. Deadbolt first. Chain second. And standing alone in the quiet hallway afterward, I realized something painful, but freeing at the same time. I was no longer afraid of losing my family. Because the truth was, they had already left long ago. 3 days later, Nolan's lawyer contacted Celia. That sentence alone would have destroyed me a month earlier. Now, sitting across from Celia in her office, while rain streaked the windows behind her desk, I mostly felt tired. Not dramatic tiredness, not cinematic heartbreak. Just the deep exhaustion that comes from realizing people you loved had been quietly preparing to erase pieces of your life while smiling to your face. Celia slid the letter across the desk toward me. Temporary wellness concerns. Recommended assisted transition. Suggested property oversight. Every sentence sounded polished enough to appear reasonable to strangers, while feeling poisonous to the person it was actually about. "They're still trying," I whispered. "Yes," Celia replied calmly. "But now they're reacting instead of planning. That makes them sloppy." She opened another folder. Inside were printed screenshots from the surveillance system Eddie had helped recover through the cloud backups. This time, Celia turned the papers around slowly so I could see them one by one. The first image showed my kitchen. Timestamp: 8:14 p.m. Tessa stood near the stove. Her hand was on the burner knob. I stared at the picture without breathing. The next screenshot showed her placing my pill organizer beside the fruit bowl near the window. Another showed Nolan entering the house while I was out grocery shopping. Another showed Tessa carrying my purse toward the laundry room cabinet. Carefully, deliberately. My chest tightened so painfully, I thought for one terrible second I might actually faint. Not because I doubted myself anymore, because I finally understood how long they had been constructing this version of me. Confused, forgetful, unsafe. Celia's voice softened slightly. We also recovered deleted audio from one of the archived clips. She pressed a button on her laptop. Tessa's voice filled the office. If she leaves the stove on again, we can document escalation. Then Nolan's voice. She's getting worse anyway. I closed my eyes. That hurt more than the cameras. Because buried underneath manipulation and greed, there had still been a tiny part of me hoping Nolan genuinely believed he was helping me. But this sounded strategic, calculated, almost rehearsed. Celia shut the laptop. We're filing formal action tomorrow morning, she said. Illegal surveillance, unlawful monitoring, attempted coercive control, property interference. I gave a weak laugh. You make my family sound like organized crime. Celia looked at me evenly over her amber glasses. Miriam, organized crime usually shows more loyalty. That almost broke me. Not with tears, with recognition. The legal meeting happened the following Friday in a private conference room downtown. Nolan arrived first. He looked older somehow, not physically, spiritually, like stress had hollowed him out from the inside. Tessa arrived 5 minutes later, carrying a leather folder against her chest like armor. The moment they saw me sitting beside Celia, both of them froze slightly. Good. For once, let them feel watched. Nobody raised their voice during that meeting. That was the strangest part. No screaming, no dramatic accusations. Just facts. Celia laid out the evidence methodically. Camera records, cloud logs, archived footage, timestamps, bank inquiries, emails with Farley Brenner. One piece at a time, I watched Nolan's face lose color slowly as the truth became impossible to dodge. Tessa tried first. We installed the cameras because we feared for Miriam's safety. Celia immediately placed printed screenshots on the table. Tessa, she said calmly, this image shows you staging a gas leak. Silence. Heavy silence. Nolan stared at the photographs like he had never seen them before. Then came the purse screenshots. The medication. The archived labels. Confusion_episode_3. Disoriented after nap. I saw shame finally appear in Nolan's face. Real shame. Not embarrassment over being caught. Something deeper. He looked at me slowly. Mom. I held up my hand. No. That single word stopped him completely. For most of my life, I had rushed to soften things for Nolan, to rescue him from guilt, to make difficult moments easier. Not anymore. Celia slid the final document across the table. Here are the conditions, she said. Immediate removal of all surveillance equipment. Destruction of all archived recordings under legal supervision. Permanent surrender of house keys. No further financial or medical interference. No unauthorized entry onto my property. And most importantly, no petition for guardianship or competency review would ever be filed against me. Tessa looked furious now. Cornered animals usually do. "This is insane," she snapped. "After everything we've done for you." I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound startled even me. "You installed cameras in my home," I said quietly. "You manipulated my environment. You tried to convince me I was losing my mind." I looked directly at Nolan. "And the worst part is, you almost succeeded." That finally broke him. Nolan covered his face with both hands and sat there silently for several seconds. When he looked back up, his eyes were red. "I didn't know how far it had gotten," he whispered. Tessa turned toward him instantly. "Nolan." "No." His voice cracked sharply. "Stop." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear flicker across her face. Not fear of me, fear of losing control over him. And suddenly, I understood something that should have occurred to me months earlier. Tessa may have started this, but Nolan had allowed it. That was his guilt to carry now, not mine. The cameras came out on a gray Tuesday morning. 2 technicians from a private security company arrived at exactly 9 o'clock with sealed evidence bags, legal paperwork, and quiet expressions that told me they had seen ugly family situations before. One by one, they removed every device from my house while Celia supervised from the dining room table with a yellow legal pad and a cup of bitter black coffee. The lamp in the living room, the smoke detectors, the hallway unit, the ceramic owl Tessa had wrapped for me in silver paper last Christmas while smiling across my dinner table. 7 cameras. 7 little windows into my life. I stood in the kitchen holding Arthur's old mug while the final device disappeared into an evidence case. The house sounded different afterward. Softer, cleaner, like it could finally breathe again. By noon, Nolan and Tessa had signed every legal condition. No contact without permission, no access to my property, no guardianship attempts, no financial interference, all archived footage permanently destroyed under supervision. Tessa signed angrily, jaw tight enough to crack stone. Nolan looked like a man attending his own funeral. He tried speaking to me once before leaving. "Mom, I never wanted..." I stopped him gently. "That's the problem, Nolan," I said quietly. "You stopped thinking about what I wanted a very long time ago." He looked down immediately. Not at me. At the floor. That mattered. After they left, the silence inside the house felt enormous. Not lonely. Just honest. I spent the next week changing little things. New locks, new curtains in the guest room, fresh paint in the hallway. I even moved Arthur's old reading chair closer to the river-facing window, because for 7 years I'd kept it exactly where he left it, as though grief might punish me for touching anything. Junie visited almost every evening after work. The first time she came over after the legal settlement, she stood awkwardly near the doorway holding a paper bag from Bellamy's bakery. "I brought blackberry scones," she said softly, like a peace offering. I hugged her before she could apologize. None of this had been her fault. A few days later, Otis helped me install motion lights near the porch while complaining about my extension cord management skills. Eddie stopped by once with a box of old-fashioned privacy covers for laptops and tablets, just in case the modern world gets any stupider. Even Celia came for dinner one Sunday evening. I made chicken pot pie with sage, roasted carrots with thyme, and a persimmon chutney recipe Arthur used to love even though he always claimed fruit had no business near meat. For the first time in months, laughter returned to the house naturally instead of cautiously. Nolan called several times after that. I didn't answer, not out of revenge, simply because some wounds need silence more than conversation. One evening, near the start of spring, I stood alone in the living room, holding the empty porcelain lamp base, before placing it into a donation box for goodwill. I kept looking at the tiny hidden compartment where the lens had once been. Such a small thing to damage a family so completely. Then I carried the box outside and left it by the porch. When I came back in, the room felt lighter. I still sit by the river most mornings with my coffee. The porch still leans slightly to the left. Arthur's wind chimes still sound crooked during storms, but nobody watches me anymore. And in this house, that finally feels like peace. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments honestly. At what moment would you have cut Nolan and Tessa out of your life?